I introduced myself to the station the same way I introduced myself to every piece of government steel and wire I'd ever been paid to fix by talking to it like it might answer back. I was a field electronics tech out of Anchorage, contracted to keep the automated weather eyes open across the interior, and the Iverson Ridge Array had been blind for 3 days. The rotor on the anemometer was stuck, the satellite uplink had gone intermittent, and the station's backup diesel, if the diagnostics were telling the truth, had started drinking more fuel than it should. Standing on the snowpack pad with frost crunching under my boots and my breath coming out in tired ghosts, I tapped the aluminum siding with my knuckles and said, "We're not here to judge. We're here to help." The ridge didn't care. The wind shouldered past us, full of dry needles of snow that stung exposed cheeks and found seams. Maya, my partner for this run, laughed into her balaclava and tugged the sled with our cases a little closer to the door. "You always sweet-talk them," she said, "because the last repeater you romanced bit you." "It learned boundaries," I said, "and I learned to wear thicker gloves." The pilot who dropped us, a quiet man who flew like he had a personal relationship with gravity, had lifted before we could second-guess the plan, whether it was rolling in from the west like a shoulder. The station sat on a scab of rock above a bowl of black spruce that looked like a drowned forest. In good light, you could see the line of the river cut through like the part in a giant's hair. In this light, everything was blue and white and the color of old knives. There was a rule they told you about Iverson Ridge in the briefing notes, but it didn't show up in the paperwork I signed. It came from the older guys, the ones with faces chapped into maps and hands that stayed cracked all summer. They said it the way fishermen pass down weather, without drama, because the drama is built in. The rule was simple. If someone knocks on the siding after midnight, don't open the door. We said it to each other once in the chopper hangar, laughing because rules like that are for places with ghosts, and we work for people who wrote grants. Then we said it again at the airstrip, because the wind there had a voice and a habit of threading old warnings through new wires. Now, standing at Iverson's steel door while the wind tried on our names, we didn't say it. We didn't need to. You carry some sentences in your bones. Inside smelled like dust and diesel and a little like mouse, which meant the traps needed checking. We stamped snow off, brought the cases in, and dogged the door. The station was a rectangle of lived-in metal. Comms rack, battery bank, inverter, a folding table with coffee rings fossilized in a map of mistakes, 2 bunks in a curtained corner, and a wall of telemetry screens that were trying to reboot their way into good behavior. I shrugged off my pack, and the cold unwillingly let my shoulders go. Maya peeled back her hood and shook out a spill of dark hair that the hat had taught to behave. "We've got 6 hours before the worst of it," she said, tapping the barometer readout with a finger she warmed in her mouth first. "Let's earn our ride out." We worked. Work was the way you talked back to the cold. I had the panel open and the uplink card out inside of 10 minutes. The card was fine, which was great news if you were the card, and terrible news if you were the man whose signature paid for the helicopter. Maya crawled under the bench to check the conduit run where the last crew had added splice. She grunted, said a word about amateurs, and made it unamateur with 3 zip ties and a rolled knuckle of tape. The wind beat its slow fists on the siding like it was reminding us about the rule early. It wasn't midnight. It wasn't even close. Still, the rhythm carried a shape the building recognized. Steel knows its own, and it knows when something outside is trying to sound like wind and forgetting a few notes. "Battery 1 is sulking," Maya said, popping the cover and giving the posts a careful scrub. 2 and 3 are saints. Tell me the diesel's not lying. "It's lying," I said, watching the flow meter do arithmetic it shouldn't have known. "She's drinking." "Fine," she said. "We'll run her lean and babysit until the blow passes." She sat back on her heels and wiped her hands on a rag. "You hear that?" It was a thin sound far under the wind. Not mouse. Not the small, busy scrabbling of something that wanted your granola bars. This sound had patience in it, like a finger drawn slowly along a seam. "Expansion," I said, because you always give the first weird noise a simple name. Metal's warming. Uh-huh, she said. She didn't look convinced, but she handed me the uplink card like a surgeon handing the right tool, and we moved through the checklist the way you move through winter, one line at a time, addressing problems at the speed they announced themselves. By dusk, the sky had turned the color of bruised fruit. The spruce bowl below blurred into a single black scarf. We ate noodles with gloves on and talked about nothing that could be put in a report. Work partners have their own religion. You don't tempt outcomes by naming them. The first night shift at an outpost always feels like breaking a horse. You sit with the system, and the system sees if it can throw you. I took the 2200 to 200 and let Maya rack out behind the curtain. The diesel chattered like an old man who'd spent too long on a dock. The screens blinked their measure blink. The wind turned meaner. If someone knocks on the siding after midnight, don't open the door. I didn't say it out loud. I was thinking it so hard it felt like prayer. I flipped through telemetry that should have soothed me and failed. Temperature fell to numbers that made lungs brittle. Gusts sheared off the ridge and hooked into the valley like claws. The anemometer thought about spinning and changed its mind. At 0006, something asked to come in. It didn't sound like a person. It wasn't the cheerful stupidity of a lost hiker with too much brand new gear and not enough thought. It wasn't the rhythmic authority of a ranger or a pilot with a hand he didn't want to lose to frostbite. It was polite almost. 3 taps with breath between them, as if whatever stood in the dark had been practicing the timing and wanted a grade. I listened. The wind grumbled, then laid back as if it wanted me to hear better. I reached under the table for the flashlight with the tape over the switch, so it wouldn't turn on in a bag and kill itself. I didn't turn it on. All the light I needed was in the screens and the thin green of the inverter status. My ears did the rest. 3 taps. Closer to the corner this time. I pictured the corner, cold, welded, with a spot where paint had peeled to bare metal the color of knives, and felt foolish for giving my brain a picture to play with. I stood, and the stool scraped the floor with a sound that tried to be louder than my heart. The curtain shifted, and Maya's voice came out of it. Everything good? Fine. I lied, because lies can be bandages if you cut them right. Wind's showing off. She breathed. She didn't come out. I loved her for that. In the small, temporary way, you love people you might have to trust with your life for 3 days and never see again. I checked the door bar and the latch the way a man checks a seatbelt before landing. I set the flashlight on the table where my hand could find it without my eyes. I sat. I put on the kettle because steam makes a sound that fills air your brain wants to use for thinking wrong thoughts. The taps didn't come again for a long stretch. I let my shoulders drop 1 notch. At 0121, the diesel hiccuped. Only once, like a drunk surprised by his own reflection. The lights didn't even flicker. The sound, though, had weight. It made the station make a second sound, small, not fear but attention. A whisper through ducting. A shift in the floor's advice to my boots. Talk to me, I said to the panel, and it did. Fuel draw steady but a little too proud of itself, oil pressure fine, exhaust temp walking toward hot, and thinking about taking a coat off. I feathered the throttle a hair, and she settled like a horse that recognizes the hand. The taps came then, on the far wall, not by the door at all. For this time. Then nothing. Then a fifth, like a student trying to remember if the test was multiple choice. I could have stood. I could have put my ear to the cold metal to prove a point to no one. Instead, I poured the water, watched steam ghost over a map of the Brooks Range that some forgotten tech had taped to the wall, and told myself a better lie. Settling. Ice. The kind of sound that only hears like this at night, because the day is too loud with doing. Maya's curtain whispered again. You're still fine, she said, not asking and not telling, making a sentence into a lifeline between bunks and benches. Still fine, I said. The wind found a new key and played it. The spruce bowl answered with a sound trees shouldn't make, like teeth talking to teeth. I checked the uplink anyway because that was the job, and the job was the armor, and armor was why we came home. At 0159, the knock returned to the door. 3 taps. The breath between them was shorter, like someone who'd walked uphill and wanted you to know they were being reasonable about it. It was almost a kindness, the way you knock when you don't want to scare the children. If someone knocks on the siding after midnight, don't open the door. I said it in my head, and then before my brain could tell me not to, I said it out loud. The words hung in the station like cold fog. They sounded older than my voice. The diesel kept its pace. The screens kept their green. Outside, the ridge leaned in as if to listen. I didn't go to the door. I didn't move at all, except for my hand finding the flashlight and my other hand finding the bar on the door and resting there, not to open, but to remind both of us who it belonged to. The taps didn't come again. The wind came instead, big and careless and full of its own history. The hour folded itself into morning, and the station let me keep my story. When I woke Maya for a shift, I told her about the hiccup and the oil temp and none of the rest. She looked at the door, then at me, and nodded the way you nod when you already knew what you weren't told. We traded places in the religion. I lay down because dawn was on its way, and the body will take what it can when it can, and the last thing I told myself before the bunk took me was the rule that wasn't in any manual, the one that had ridden in my bones since the hangar. If someone knocks on the siding after midnight, don't open the door. When I woke again, the light coming in through the slit of the curtain wasn't sunlight. It was that thick gray, non-committal glow you get in winter when the sky hasn't decided whether it's day or not. The wind had dropped into a low moan, and the station creaked the way a ship does when it's thinking about its age. Maya was at the console, hood up, one leg tucked under her. She didn't turn when I pushed the curtain aside. Diesel's still running? I asked, pulling on my boots. Yeah, she said too evenly. No hiccups since you handed over. She was staring at one of the side monitors, the uplink camera feed that looked out over the east approach. It was mostly static, a mix of pixelated snowflakes and noise. But every few seconds, the image would clear just enough to see the tree lean down in the spruce bowl. Glitchy feed? I asked. She nodded. Started at around 0300. Just every so often it clears, and I think I see movement down there. I stepped up beside her. Movement? Like animals? Her eyes stayed on the screen. Sure, let's say animals. We both knew how far down and how steep that slope was. Anything big enough to show up from this distance would have to be tall. The camera caught another flicker of clarity. Snow, trees, and a vague dark shape too straight to be a trunk and too still to be blowing in the wind. Then it was gone, eaten by static again. I leaned closer to the monitor. You didn't log it? She shook her head. Not yet. I wanted you to see it first. The decision not to log something out here wasn't small. Everything got logged. Fuel draws, temperature anomalies, a loose screw on the comms rack. You did not log something unless you were pretty sure it was better left off the official record. You think it's connected to the knocking? I asked quietly. She finally looked at me. Her face was pale in the monitor's glow. I didn't hear knocking, she said. Not last night. I felt the air in the room change when she said it. The way her voice landed, matter of fact, not challenging, made my skin feel too tight. Either she was telling the truth, and the knocking had been meant for me alone, or she'd heard it and decided we were both better off pretending she hadn't. The diesel sputtered then, just once, but enough to make the lights pulse. Both of us turned toward the fuel monitor. Consumption spiked for a fraction of a second, then settled back into the green. Expansion, I said, trying to hand her the same lie I'd used on myself. Her lips twitched into something like a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. Sure, she said. We spent the morning working in the kind of silence you get when both people are avoiding the same thought. I was outside for nearly an hour, swapping the anemometer rotor and clearing ice off the uplink dish with a scraper. The cold was the kind that finds its way inside your gloves, no matter how tight you cinch them. Every so often I'd stop to listen. Not to the wind. It was too steady to carry surprises, but for the absence of anything else. Inside, Maya had pulled the station log up on her laptop. She was scrolling back through the last month's entries, looking for patterns in the minor faults and out-of-range readings. There weren't many. Iverson Ridge was as temperamental as any remote outpost, but nothing in the logs explained a camera glitch that came and went like someone flipping a switch. By late afternoon, the static on the feed was constant, the shape in the trees gone, or hiding. Snow started up again, light but persistent, like ash falling from an invisible fire. We ate in shifts, both of us pretending we weren't checking the clock as midnight got closer. When my turn for the night shift came, I did the usual walk-around, checked the door bar, felt the temperature on the diesel exhaust, glanced at the battery bank readouts. Everything was normal enough to make me suspicious. I settled in a chair at the console and listened to the building breathe. The wind had dropped to almost nothing, which was worse. Quiet in the backcountry isn't comfort. It's a held breath, and you're never sure whose. The first sound came at 0038. Not knocking this time. A scrape, high up on the siding near the east wall. Metal on metal, like something dragging a hook slowly across the paneling. The sound moved a foot or two, then stopped. I stayed frozen, one hand on the desk, the other hovering over the flashlight. A minute later, the scrape came again, lower this time, almost at floor level. It traveled along the wall toward the door, slow enough that I could hear the faint vibration through the floor. My heartbeat was so loud in my ears I almost missed it. The faintest tap once on the steel door. Not 3 taps, not even 2, just one, like a reminder. I glanced toward the bunk curtain. Still, no movement. The single tap came again, and then, just under the sound of the diesel, something else, a quiet, deliberate exhale, as if someone had leaned their mouth close to the seam of the door and breathed in. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just kept my hand on the door bar, not to open it, but to make damn sure it stayed closed. The breath against the door stopped. I sat there for a long time, watching the clock on the wall above the comms rack, counting the seconds between diesel chuffs. The idea was simple. If I could still hear the engine, it meant the station was alive, and if the station was alive, I didn't have to make any decisions I'd regret. The wind hadn't come back, which made the building too quiet. It wasn't absence of noise that bothered me. It was that I could hear the shape of every little sound. The faint hum of the inverter had an edge to it now, like a dentist drill in another room. My own breathing sounded borrowed. When the first thud came, it was on the opposite wall from the door. Not loud, but deliberate. I imagined it leaving a dent in the siding the way a fingertip leaves a mark in thin snow, just enough to show it had been there. The sound moved upward like someone climbing slowly, testing each handhold. A second thud. A third, higher each time. And then, against the upper panel near the roofline, something tapped. Once. Twice. It wasn't a knock. It was testing. Measuring. I told myself it could be windborne debris. A branch. Ice. But in the same breath, I knew there was nothing tall enough, close enough, or living enough to do that up here. I glanced at the east wall camera feed. Static. By 0200, whatever it was had stopped making noise. But I stayed wired, my ears aching from the strain of listening. At 0247, the diesel sputtered again. 2 short hiccups in quick succession, and the lights dimmed just enough to make the shadows on the wall sway. That was when Maya's curtain shifted. She stepped out, eyes narrowed against the light. Why is it so cold in here? I looked at the thermostat readout on the main console. The cabin temperature had dropped 6 degrees in less than half an hour. That shouldn't have been possible without the heater kicking on, but the heater's status showed idle. Must be the sensor, I said automatically. She crossed her arms. You mean the same sensor that hasn't failed once since we got here? Before I could answer, there was another scrape, long, slow, and high up on the east wall. This one ended in a sound I hadn't heard before, like fingertips sliding off a wet railing. Maya went still. That's outside. Yeah, I said, and my voice sounded wrong in my own ears. We both stared at the door for a full minute. No more sounds came. She finally said, I'm staying up. The next morning, we checked the exterior. From the door, the siding looked the same as it had when we arrived, frosted with rime, dull in the flat light. But when we circled to the east wall, Maya stopped so fast the snow squeaked under her boots. The paneling was marked, not dense. These were long streaks, vertical, running from the base almost to the roofline. The frost around them had melted and refrozen in uneven patterns, as though heat had been applied in narrow lines. The streaks were grouped in fives. I didn't touch them. Maya didn't either. We both knew what they looked like. Could be ice expansion. I tried. She gave me a look that could have cut through the wall. And maybe I'm a reindeer, she said, then shouldered past me toward the door. By that evening, the weather closed in. The ridge disappeared behind a wall of white, and the spruce bowl below was gone altogether. Visibility was less than 50 feet, and the wind came back with a sound like sandpaper dragged across skin. Not a failure. An off. The relay clicked, and the fans coasted to silence. The cabin temperature readout started dropping like a bad stock. The diesel kept running, steady and content, as if heat were not its business. I went to the breaker and flipped the heater feed off and on. Nothing. I checked the controller, the fuse, the safety cutoffs. All fine. The fan sat like men with their arms crossed. Don't, Maya said from the doorway, because she saw where my eyes were going. I was looking at the emergency intake damper by the east wall. It was closed and latched, as it should have been, with a turn wheel painted with old yellow stripes. If I opened it, we could bleed in outside air, give the system a reason to care. If I opened it, I would be opening something. Okay, I said. I moved instead to the manual override on the controller and held it for 5 seconds, then 10. The fan started up like men grumbling about overtime. Warmth shouldered back into the room. The relay snapped satisfied. Something scraped outside in a quick arc, as if annoyed to be ignored. Maya exhaled. Still boring. Relentlessly, I said. At 0210, the heater cycled off again. I did the override again. We repeated that dance every 20 minutes until dawn, and each time the fans came back, the scrape flicked against the east wall with the short, irritated sound of a spoon tapped against a cup. We slept in our jackets for an hour after sunrise. When we woke, the station smelled faintly like hot pennies and something sweet that wasn't sugar. We took inventory and pretended this was still a job. Fuel was good. Rations fine. Flare gun in the locker. First aid kit missing the better tape because I'd used it on the uplink wiring. I wanted to blame myself for that because blame is a way to stay in control. The radio check with Anchorage came back strong and cheerful, a voice in a warm room. Weather closing, they said, but you've got a window after tomorrow. Sit tight. Log your anomalies. We logged the repairs. We didn't log the knocks. At noon, the wind swung around and came in from the north, sharper and cleaner. The smell disappeared the way a headache lifts. For 2 hours, the station felt like a place filled with ideas instead of waiting. At 14:30, the east camera cleared for 3 seconds. In that single breath of clarity, the spruce bowl sharpened and the snow looked blue and the line of the river drew itself like a sentence. I saw tracks. Not moose, not wolf, not the stuttering, stop-start calligraphy of a wolverine. These ran straight, as engineers' rules from the tree line toward the slope below the station, then vanished under drift, then reappeared where drift broke. The spacing was wrong for any four-legged body. Too far for a man in this cold. Each impression was long and thin, oval, not round. Like handprints. The feed blinked back to static. I saw it, Maya said, already on the keyboard, scrubbing back the few seconds the buffer would allow. The buffer had other ideas. Snow. Noise. Clean. It's enough, I said. For what? To be careful. We're past careful. She closed the laptop like it had said something rude. Fifth incident, the worst before we broke. A pressure built in the room around 100 that made both of us stand at the same time without saying why. The air wasn't thinner. It was heavier. Our chests worked harder for the same breath and were told to wait their turn. The diesel hiccuped. Then again. The lights didn't dim. The bar on the door rattled once, like a laugh. Fans, I said, heading for the heater override. but the fans were already on. The temperature on the readout ticked down anyway, a tenth of a degree at a time, then faster, as if the number had decided to be honest about something it had been lying about all night. The uplink camera cleared and stayed clear. We both turned. The east feed showed the slope in perfect, hard-edged black and white. Snow moved in veils, and at the top of the frame, just at the edge of where the station would be if the camera could see its own home, a pale oval pressed into view. It held there, straining to flatten against the lens, blurred by frost, rimmed in rime, as if a face were trying to learn how to be seen through ice. 5 faint lines dragged across the glass. The feed went white, and then black, then returned to static. We stood, stupid with staring. Wind, I tried, and heard my own voice and wanted to throw it away. Maya's mouth had that small, stubborn line it gets when something scares her and she refuses to give it any more of her breath. "It's learning," she said. "What?" "Us," she said. "Our words. Our timings. It's learning us." The station vibrated then, not from the heater, not from the diesel. From the door. Not a knock. A shoulder. The bar jumped in its cups. The door bowed inward, the rubber gasket creasing. Not far. A quarter inch. Then a half. I grabbed the bar and put my weight on it and felt the pressure through the iron like a hand on a hand through a glove. Maya put her shoulder beneath mine and swore under her breath in a language she hadn't used since she was small. "Call," she said, and I did, one-handed, to the pilot's frequency first, then to Anchorage, then to any idiot with a headset. The radio ate my voice and gave me the cheerful warmth of a man who wasn't here. "Copy, Iverson Ridge. Forecast holds. Window tomorrow, 1100 to 1400. Sit tight. Keep the heater friendly." The door pushed again. The bar bit into my palm. Something on the other side exhaled a long, contented breath. "It's warmer in here," the voice said, and this time it was Maya's voice. "No," she said, shaking her head like she could throw her own tone off her shoulders. "No, no, no. It wants us to argue with ourselves," I said, and surprised myself by sounding calm. We held the bar until the pressure eased. The door settled back into its frame with a tiny sound like relief. The room loosened. For a minute. Inside, the air felt heavy. The heater cycled on and off more often than it should have. The camera feeds flickered until they were useless. We'd planned to work through the night in shifts again, but neither of us really slept. I dozed with one ear open, drifting in and out until Maya nudged me awake at 0113. "There's someone outside," she said. I was upright before my brain was fully back. "What?" "Listen." I held my breath. The wind was still there, but under it, crunching. Slow footsteps on snow. Coming from the east side, circling toward the door. Maya's face was pale in the dim light. "You think it's—" The footsteps stopped. 3 taps. The rule. We both froze like the sound had switched something off inside us. 3 taps again, louder this time. And then a voice. Muffled by the door, low, but clear enough to make my stomach knot. "Help me." Maya's eyes snapped to mine. "That's—" "Don't," I said. She looked back at the door, and I could see her lips forming the same thought that had just passed through my head. What if it is someone? What if it's real? The voice came again. "Please, it's so cold." Everything in me wanted to move. To check the lock, to at least look. But I kept my hands flat on the table, my fingers digging into the grain. "Not our job," I said. "Not at night." The voice spoke one more time, quieter now. "It's so cold in here." Maya flinched. Neither of us touched the door. The next day's light was flat and gray, no sun. We checked the area outside. The snow in front of the door was undisturbed. No tracks, no drift patterns that could have hidden them. The surface was smooth except for 3 shallow impressions, side by side, each about the width of a hand. The east wall had a new set of streaks. That was the second incident. The third came that night, and it was worse. The third incident waited until the worst hour. Snow hammered the siding like thrown rice. The wind had teeth again. The heater ran hard enough that the metal skin of the station vibrated with it. At 0241, the door handle moved. Not much. Just a click and a slow downward weight, the bar stopped. I watched it go a quarter inch and stop, go another quarter, stop like a hand unfamiliar with gloves. Maya stood beside me before I could tell her. We didn't touch the handle. We watched the bar tremble against it. "Bolt's good," I said because saying it made it more true. The handle eased back up. The pressure left, slow as a tide. A beat later, 3 taps pattered near the floor, like knuckles testing for hollow. The voice followed, as calm as a receptionist. "It's warmer in here," it said. That phrasing snagged something in my head. "Now I'm cold. Not let me in. It's warmer in here." Like a man making small talk on an elevator. "Back away," I said, not to the door, to the thought that wanted my hand on it. We waited until our legs ached. The handle didn't move again that night. At dawn, we found a faint smear along the door seam. No color, just shine, like someone had run a wet fingertip along the gasket. We didn't touch it. By mid-morning, the uplink steadied enough to spit a backlog of data. We moved through it like diverse, slow, careful, looking for the snag that would tell us why the array kept choking. Half the packets were fine. Half had gaps that looked deliberate, as if something had taken a neat bite out of the stream and chewed. Timestamps drifted by single seconds here and there, as if the station had lost track of the world for a blink and made up a number to fill the hole. "Clock drift," Maya said. "Shouldn't be," I said. "GPS discipline holds even when we're blind." I tapped the chassis. "Unless someone's holding the antenna." She looked at me like she wanted to laugh and couldn't. "Don't. Not someone," I said, kinder. "Something. Ice." We stepped out with goggles and a heat gun on an extension. The world was a white room with one wall missing. At the mast, I set my feet and leaned into the wind and melted the collar where rime glued the cable run to the steel. The ice broke away in a ringing sheet. That was when we smelled it. Not diesel. Not hot metal. Sweet, faint, wrong, like something thawed that should have stayed buried. It came on the wind in pulses, not steady. "Dead anything upwind?" Maya asked, already knowing the answer. There was nothing upwind but ridge and more wind. I cupped a glove over my mask and breathed shallow. The smell arrived again, stronger, and then was gone as if embarrassed at being noticed. We finished and got inside and closed the door and stood there in our own noise, panting. "It's getting cute," Maya said finally, biting the words. "We stay boring," I said. 4th incident that night. The heater quit at 0123. At 0217, the heater stopped again. The fans whined to a halt. The temperature dropped like a finger tracing a line down a spine. The radio chirped a false low battery tone. The lights burned a fraction harder, like they were working under pride alone. "Flare," Maya said. "You think." "I think we need edges," she said. "Hard light. A line." We had 2 in the locker, emergency use only, for signal and for something else no manual will call by name. I cracked one. It coughed red. The room kicked with its sudden color. The smell of strontium bit the sweet wrongness and made it retreat 3 steps. I set the flare on a metal tray and slid it to the east wall. The red wave climbed the paneling and painted the room with a version of day that had finally learned honesty. The pressure eased. The heater fans spun up as if they'd just remembered their purpose. Again and again, Maya said, almost smiling now, "We keep making lines. It keeps trying to cross them. Then we make more," I said. We didn't sleep. We burned the first flare to a nub, lit the second at 0340, and let it gutter out just as the first incoherent light of day pushed under the clouds. The station inhaled. The pressure let go. I was pouring coffee when something knocked. 3 perfect little taps, not at the door. Inside, on the wall above the bunks, from the other side of the panel we had no access to, where the insulation and empty space lived. We both looked up. We both stayed very still. 3 more taps, then a small, careful drag of knuckles along metal, as if mapping it. I put the mug down. The coffee slopped and made a map on the table like a river delta. "It got in," Maya said, quiet, not with panic, with accounting. "No, I said because I needed the word. No, it's... The heater clicked off, then back on, then off again like a child playing with a switch. We stood in that silent minute people talk about in old stories. Then I laughed once, which was wrong and necessary, and pointed at the ceiling. We go up, I said. Roof hatch. I want eyes on vents, on seams. If there's a panel loose, we fix it. With what? She said. Faith and tape. Plenty of both. We harnessed and clipped and opened a roof hatch to a wind that wanted our faces. I hauled myself through, felt the station in my chest like a breathing thing, and crawled to the vents. Everything looked right. No gaps big enough for a hand. No rime melt that shouldn't be. The flare's smell drifted out and up. The sweet, wrong smell moved in little threads like smoke that didn't understand how to rise. I reached the east lip and looked over. The wall below wore its long streaks like old burns. New ones had joined during the night. The 5-line groups overlapped now like something testing reach. I looked farther, to the lee where the drift scalloped. A pattern there troubled my eyes. Not footprints. Not handprints. Areas where the snow hadn't fallen right, as if air had been thick enough to catch it and lay it down in sheets. Anything, Maya called from the hatch. Everything, I said. We sealed what could be sealed. We tightened what could be tightened. We closed the hatch and dogged it, and sat with our backs against it like a pair of old locks. She touched her throat and found her voice still hers. Window tomorrow, she said. He'll come at 1100. We walk to that. We walk to that, I said. Then we leave, she said. We write the report. We say the heater is temperamental, and the uplink drifts, and the diesel needs a compassionate ear. We don't write the rest. I'll write it somewhere, I said, but not where it gets people killed. She nodded. Good. We spent the day like men on a bomb squad. Slow, careful, respectful. We found 3 more places inside where the metal was warmer than it should have been, as if a hand had rested there. We found nothing loose. At 1700, the radio cheered us with a weather break wide enough to fly. We'll be there, the pilot said. On the dot. Pack light. We don't linger. We won't, I said, meaning it. Night came in a hurry, as if it had been held on a leash and someone had let go. The first knock came early, 2003, 3 taps on the door, a pause, 3 taps higher, a pause, 3 taps low, like a child inventing a game. Not tonight, I said. The heater held. The diesel kept good time. The uplink feed stayed blind. At 2300, the knock moved to the inside wall again and tapped a rhythm that matched the beat of my heart. It slowed when I slowed, sped when I did. Don't chase it, Maya said without looking up. I'm not. I lied, my breath already bargaining. At midnight, the voice came back. It used no names this time. It didn't mimic our tones. It spoke flat and present tense, like a man reading gauges. It's warmer in here, it said. You are tired. You are too. It was the last thing it said all night, and somehow that was worst. We made it to 0400, shaking, not from cold. At 0509, the station groaned and settled as if a weight had stepped off it. Dawn bled in. We packed. We did it like a drill because we had drilled it. Tools wrapped. Rations stowed. Cases latched. Nothing left that wasn't welded. At 10:32, the wop-wop came over the ridge, thin at first, and then fat and welcome. The pilot set down crabwise on the pad, skids biting, rotor sending the world into a white tantrum. He kept the engine turning. He kept his goggles on. He did not look at the east wall. We hauled cases. He pointed with 2 fingers and shouted over the blades. Fast hands. Weather window hates me. Maya threw her pack, clipped, buckled, gave me a look I did not deserve and had to be brave for. I slung the last case and turned back for one more scan of the room because that's who I am. The coffee ring map on the table. The logbook lying open to a page that read heater, cycling resolved, /uplink stabilized, /diesel steady, /anomalous exterior noise not observed. Someone had added a line beneath it. The writing was neither of ours. The pencil had pressed hard enough to ghost the impression through 3 pages. It's warmer in here. I didn't show Maya. I didn't have to. She knew without seeing. We climbed in. The pilot lifted us off the pad with a movement like relief. The station crouched under us like a thing that had learned to hold its breath. We banked. The east wall slid by under the skids. The 5-line streaks shone like ice in a sun I hadn't felt in days. As we tilted, the roof hatch flickered in the corner of my vision. It moved. Not much. Just enough for a seam to show dark. "Door!" I shouted, pointing, and the pilot misunderstood and thought I meant his door and reached, and I shook my head and pointed again, and he saw the hatch, and his mouth made a word I couldn't hear, and he nosed us forward and away, and the station fell behind into the white like a sentence swallowed. We didn't speak until the ridge was a thought behind us, and the river cut its part in the forest again, and the wind lost interest in our little bodies. When the pilot finally asked if everything played nice at Iverson, we both said, mostly, at the same time, and the lie sat between us like a third person. We made the pad at Fort Deadhorse with 10 minutes to spare before the weather slammed the door. Inside, the warm air made our faces burn. A man at a desk asked us to initial a form that did not have a line for "it's warmer in here." We took showers too hot and too long and scalded the part of our skin that remembered the smell. We slept. 2 days later, a tech team went up to Iverson to swap the heater controller and add a redundant uplink and check our work. They found the system nominal. They found the east wall streaks under new rhyme. They found the roof hatch dogged and the gasket clean. They logged their visit in a hand that worked in check marks. And on the inside of the bunk wall, behind the foam mattress where my shoulder had rested, they found 5 narrow, shiny arcs as if something had drawn its fingers there and the oil of the touch had kept the metal from oxidizing. They didn't put that in the official log either. They called us back 3 weeks later. Anchorage said it with that casual, easy tone people use when they're about to hand you a job you should refuse. One more visit, just to finalize the redundancy upgrades. Techs reported clean, but the heaters still got attitude. You know the place better than anyone. I told them there were other crews. They told me weather was lining up perfectly, a gift in February. Maya didn't say yes, didn't say no. She just looked at me with the same tired calculation I felt. If we said no, someone else would go. We landed at Iverson in a brittle noon sun. From the air, the east wall was glazed clean. The streaks were gone, or hidden under new ice. No new tracks. The roof hatch sat neat, dog-tight. The pilot kept the rotors spinning again. Windows shorter this time. If you're not done in 4 hours, I'm leaving without you. I told him I understood. I think he believed me. Inside, the station smelled empty. Not just clean, hollow. Like the air had been sitting too long in a bottle. The logbook lay open on the table, blank page up. The heater hummed steady. The diesel's rhythm was perfect. "This is wrong," Maya said, too quietly for it to be about a checklist. "We got to work fast." She opened the control panel. I went up to inspect the vents and mast. Everything looked fine, better than fine, as if someone had polished every surface. When I climbed back down the ladder into the main room, Maya wasn't at the panel anymore. She was by the east wall, crouched, her gloved fingertips hovering just over the metal. There were new streaks, 5 of them, fresh enough that the rime hadn't had time to grow over them. She didn't touch. She didn't need to. At 14:30, a sound rolled through the station. Not a knock, not a scrape. A shift, deep, structural, like the whole building settling half an inch in its own skin. We froze. The heater fan slowed, not in failure, in obedience. The air thickened. I heard it then, behind the wall above the bunks. A slow, deliberate drag of something along the metal. It moved toward the door. The bar didn't move, but the sound stayed on our side of it. "Maya," I said. She didn't answer. She was looking at the hatch in the ceiling. The gasket was bulging. Something was pressing from the other side. We both stepped back. It wasn't a shoulder this time. It wasn't testing. It was coming through. The hatch hinges groaned, not with strain, but with something working them open carefully, like it had learned how locks moved. "Flare," she whispered. I had one in my pack, last one we'd ever carried to Iverson. I cracked it. The red lit the room like a fire alarm in hell. For a second, the pressure stopped. The gasket relaxed. I thought we bought time. Then something pressed down on the flare light itself. The red halo dimmed like a hand cupping a match. I smelled that wrong sweetness again, stronger now, threaded with something metallic and hot. I don't remember deciding to move, but I was on the ladder with the flare in my hand, shoving it toward the hatch as the bolts began to turn. Whatever was above me paused. Not because of the light, because I was closer than it expected. The air between us felt occupied, heavy. I slammed the flare against the seam. A sound came back through the metal. Not pain, not fear, annoyance. Then it moved fast back across the roof. The hatch bolts spun themselves shut with a final, careful turn. The radio came alive in my ear. Storm's pushing early. I'm on my way. 2 minutes. We didn't argue. We didn't pack. We took what was already in reach and ran. The doors bar lifted under my hand, as if to help us out, which somehow felt worse. We hit the pad just as the rotor wash whipped the snow into curtains. I shoved the case into the pilot's hands, climbed in after Maya, and never looked back. Almost. At 30 feet up, against every instinct I'd grown in 10 years here, I looked. The east wall was clean. The roof hatch was shut. But the snow right under the pad, the snow we'd been standing on less than a minute ago, was smooth. Not drifted, not wind-scoured. Smooth, like something had been lying just under the surface, waiting for the rotor's weight to leave. We didn't go back. And if you ever find yourself sent to Iverson, you'd better remember the only rule that matters. It's warmer in here. Don't open the door. We didn't say much on the flight back. The pilot kept his eyes on a strip of sky that kept closing like a fist. Maya watched the floor. I watched the snow on the skids melt and drip and felt stupidly grateful for gravity. At Fort Dead Horse, a man with a lanyard asked us to rate our satisfaction with the mission. I signed my name on the wrong line and didn't fix it. Maya wrote "completed" in the comment box and underlined it twice. They put us in a warm room and gave us coffee and a laminated form that asked what we'd done to help the heater feel heard. We wrote about wiring and firmware and load balancing. We did not write about the hatch turning by itself, about the smell, about the way the light dimmed like a hand closing over a candle. The supervisor from Anchorage arrived the next day with a smile that didn't know what to do with itself. He said words like debrief and post-mortem and lessons learned. He asked if we'd observed unusual external stimuli. I said, wind. Maya said, nothing actionable. He looked relieved in a way that made me angry and thanked us for our professionalism. We flew home on a commuter with a heater that clanked like dishes. When the wheels hit the runway at Merrill, a baby cried like a kettle coming to boil, and I almost cried with it. Anchorage looked soft and ridiculous. All those yellow windows pretending the world could be lit for good if you paid the bill on time. For a week, I woke at 0030 without knowing why. I sat on the edge of the bed and listened to my apartment's noises perform themselves. A refrigerator with moral certainty. A baseboard tick that had never meant anything. On the 8th night, the tick timed itself to my breathing and held there 1 second too long. It broke on the 9th. I turned on a bathroom light and left it on until dawn. We went back to the shop because that's what you do. There were radios to fix, a snow machine with a throttle that lied, a repeater that needed the kind of patience you reserve for men who won't apologize but should. Maya, and I didn't talk about Iverson unless the room was loud. 2 weeks later, a padded envelope appeared on my bench with no return address. Inside was a thumb drive labeled Iverson, a UFCAM buffer. No one admitted to sending it. No one had to. The file had no metadata. It opened to static and stayed static for 37 seconds. On 38, the picture cleared. The east wall swam into view, hard and colorless. Snow moved in sheets. Something pale pressed against the lens and slid away. The image blurred, refocused, blurred. Then the sound came through. Not the wind. 3 taps. Measured. Polite. The buffer ended with a single word spoken very close to the microphone. It wasn't mine. It wasn't Maya's. It didn't belong to anyone who knew how to be a person. Warmer, it said, like a man trying out a tool. I unplugged the drive and put it back in the envelope and slid it into a drawer I didn't use for anything else. I told myself I would take it to the supervisor in the morning. In the morning, I told myself I'd do it after lunch. After lunch, I told myself I'd do it tomorrow. That night, just after midnight, my phone buzzed on the nightstand and showed an unknown Anchorage number. I answered because my hand did before my head could decide. Nothing. Then a breath. Not mine. "It's warmer in here," the line said, in a voice that was trying to be mine and hadn't learned where to put the edges. I hung up and turned my phone off and pulled the battery like a man from another decade. It turned itself on at 0037, screen bright, wallpaper wrong, showing the Iverson feed for a single, juddering heartbeat before failing back to black. When I told Maya, she said her smoke detector chirped at 0100 0130 and 0200. The battery was fresh. She took it down and set it in the sink, and it chirped again, louder. She turned on the stove fan and opened a window and waited for the apartment to remember what air was for. Anchorage put another crew on Iverson the following week. They flew in, swapped the controller, smiled at the camera, and flew out. They filed a clean report. They did not mention streaks. They did not mention scent. They did not mention how a station can watch you. I tried to move the thumb drive to a locker at the shop. The drawer stuck when I pulled it. When it came free, the envelope had slid to the back and wedged itself under the rail like a thing holding on. I left it there. The supervisor called us into a meeting room to ask, gently, if we felt operationally comfortable continuing remote winter work. He'd printed 2 forms that had fitness for duty baked into the small print. He said the department valued our expertise. He said there were other ridges that needed love. I said, yes. Maya said yes. We both meant we'd rather be there than leave it for someone without a rule. The next job was a repeater near Talkeetna, tucked into spruce and rock, pretty as a painting if paintings could break your ankle. We snowshoed in with a sled and a thermos and a willingness to pretend the world was simple. The unit had a panel dent someone else's boot had made in a better season. The wind tasted like coins. We fixed it with a fuse and a scold. We ate soup that tasted like courage out of a plastic container. We listened to the forest learn our names and decide we weren't interesting. It was almost enough. On the way out, at a bend where the trail lip dropped to a creek, I saw 5 narrow streaks melted into the snow where a fallen log cast a shadow. Not deep, not long, just there. I didn't stop. I didn't tell Maya. I took 3 careful steps past and kept my poles light on the crust and waited until the trees were behind us to breathe like a person again. Spring pretended to start. Anchorage thawed around the edges. The city grew that smell you only notice when it leaves. Wet wood and exhaust, and the first rotten patches of snow surrendering to dirt. The knock came at my apartment on a Tuesday in March, late enough that no one knocks with good news. 3 taps. Not loud, not shy, just enough at the door to learn the rhythm again. My hallway had the kind of echo that makes you hear your own heartbeat. I stood and didn't stand closer. I put my palm flat to the wall next to the deadbolt, not the door itself. The wood was warm. Wrong address, I said, and surprised myself by how calm it sounded. I didn't say the rule out loud, because saying it in town felt like tempting something that understood contracts. The knocks didn't come again. The radiator coughed and settled like a throat cleared. Somewhere above me, a neighbor's laugh rose and fell like a fisherman rowing away. Maya started checking in at 2310 and 0400 with a single text. Fine. I sent back fine. Sometimes I meant it. Sometimes I wanted to say, it's learning us. On a quiet Sunday, I went to the water and sat in the car with the heater running and watched the inlet make its old, patient arguments with the tide. Ice sheets bumped and negotiated. A gull stood on a floe and complained in a voice that belonged to no one and everyone. I turned the radio on and spun the dial through stations with men who loved their own voices and songs I'd loved too long to hear fresh. For a single second, in the dead space between frequencies, the speaker coughed static that arranged itself into 3 little taps. Then went back to weather and advertisements for tires. I drove home the long way, past the hangars with their mouths open, past the field where we'd lifted into gray that first morning, past the parts of town that still believed doors were just wood and locks were just metal. The shop put Iverson on the spring maintenance schedule and then crossed it out and then penciled it back in. No one wanted to be the one to say we were done with the Ridge. No one wanted to say the Ridge wasn't done with us. 2 days before the scheduled flight, the pilot texted a photo to the crew group. A pale noon, a flat horizon. Iverson, small and clean. A line of 5 streaks on the east wall, bright as signatures. He wrote, "You forgot your fingerprints." I stared at the picture until it learned my face. I typed "Don't go alone" and deleted it. I typed "Bring a flare" and deleted that too. I typed "nothing" and sent it, and the nothing looked like cowardice and the only kind of wisdom we can afford. You want to know what it was? So do I. You want the right noun. You want the hunter's name, so you can call it by that and make it smaller. All I have is the shape it left where heat met metal, and the way it learned how to speak a single word correctly, and the way it pressed itself into anything that kept a promise. I still fix towers. I still sweet-talk boxes made of wire and hope. I still wake sometimes at the wrong minute and lie listening for an old rhythm I hate and miss. If your work sends you to the snow and the wind and a metal building the world forgot on purpose, take your tools. Take your patience. Take a thing that makes hard light and another that makes an honest noise. Don't take pride. It breaks. If you hear 3 taps on the siding after midnight, you'll be tempted to be the kind of person who opens doors. You'll be tempted to prove something to yourself and to a story you're telling about who you are in the cold. Don't. If someone knocks on the siding after midnight, don't open the door. If a voice tries to tell you what it learned about warmth in a place that doesn't believe in it, don't argue. The door is not a mouth. You're not a host. You'll go home. You'll pretend doors and cities are different. You'll put your palm to the wall beside the deadbolt sometimes and feel nothing but the silly comfort of drywall warmed by a human life. Most nights, that will be true. On the nights, it isn't. On the nights something patient practices your voice on a line you didn't give it. Remember the only tool that mattered at Iverson. Not a flare. Not a wrench. A sentence you carry in your bones. If someone knocks on the siding after midnight, don't open the door.